Welcome back. You're watching our special coverage of the Union Budget 2023. And is it a budget with the focus very much on elections 2024? The big focus seems to be CAPEX expenditure. There's been a huge increase in the outlay there. And of course, also a change in tax structures. Again, this is a big change, the first time since 2018. So also a mid-class budget. But let's go across to the growth focus, to the capital expenditure by the government. I'm joined by Mr. Narendran. He, of course, is the past president of CI and the CEO and managing director of Tata Steel. So, Mr. Narendran, I think the huge infrastructure focus would be something you would greatly welcome. Tell us for you, what's the big headline out of this budget?
I think certainly, as you said, the infrastructure focus is very welcome. As CII, we've been asking for it, and I think every year for the last 3 years, the finance minister has, in some sense, given us what we've asked for. And I think it's great to see that there's been a 33% increase this year. And I think what's also important is last year they seem to have spent what they had allocated for expenditure. It's not just the allocation but the expenditure, because infrastructure has a huge multiplier effect. It helps demand growth in industries like the one I represent, steel as well as cement. It helps the commercial vehicles industry. It creates employment across the country. So I think it has a huge impact. It also helps us as industry because logistics has always been a bottleneck for us. Logistics costs in India are higher than it is in other countries. So hopefully this helps us become more competitive outside the factory gates. And logistics costs in India about 13-14% of the GDP, whereas in most of the countries it's around 8%. So it helps us in both ways, both in bringing down the cost of doing business as well as in creating demand.
So as you said, a 33% increase in outlay up to 10 lakh crores, but we're also seeing a huge investment in railways infrastructure. You're seeing an investment in highways. Do you think this is all adding up to be really an ecosystem, which is for corporate India and for giving jobs? Because that's really a key issue. Rajat Sethi is making that point. They're also in increasing the jobs at a time when India is now the largest population in the world, surpassing China.
Absolutely. I think the multimodal approach is very important because it's not just about building roads. I think railways is how you can more efficiently move material across. It's more cost efficient, carbon efficient. And I think the focus on coastal shipping is also very welcome because that's even more cost efficient and carbon efficient. So I think if you look at China, for instance, a lot of movement happens on waterways, and then you have railways and then you have roads. Whereas in India, it's predominantly roads because the railways infrastructure is not kept up with the requirements. And similarly, the waterways and ports have not really kept up pace. So I think this focus on a multimodal logistics ecosystem is very welcome.
Nirmala Sitharaman also joins us, former president of FICCI, and Nirmala Sitharaman, for you, as I said, what are the big headlines out of this budget? We're talking about the growth orientation, but others making the point also that this perhaps is the government stepping in because the private sector hasn't been able to come up to this kind of investment, which was perhaps expected. We had, of course, the 2 COVID years, but private sector investment should have been growing much more at this time. And what incentives does India Inc. need for that?
You know, there's a FICCI survey which has suggested that many corporates are up at the 70% capacity utilization and may begin to look at the private sector investment going forward now in this coming year. So you're right, it has been disappointing, but the reason why we haven't seen it is because demand was clearly not there across industries, and supply therefore was sufficient to meet the demand that was there. So any growth that comes into our economy, which is clearly what this budget is about as well, it's about growth, that investment by government, yes, will indeed create demand and will begin to push private sector in. The other point I would make is the market borrowing from government, it looks pretty decent and one which will not crowd out the private sector. And I would add, we are seeing the return of the MSMEs, which thus far has been quite an issue for the economy. We saw big companies revive very quickly, but MSMEs struggling. And this is evident in terms of the credit growth, which the economic survey mentions in the January to November 22 period at 30.5%. So credit flow has continued or started in a robust way to MSMEs, which suggests they're alive and kicking. Banks are supporting them. And I think the credit guarantee scheme being, with the 9,000 crores, which will be available to MSMEs, enables them to borrow multiples of that particular guarantee at lower costs because it lowers the risk. And this is a benefit which the middle core of Indian industry, which is so important for us, because that's where the employment is, that's where a lot of the productive manufacturing happens, begins to return. I think we will have a very good year next year. There will be caution because many companies look to international markets and exports, and that may be somewhat abated because of the fears of recession. But domestic demand is there and coming back, and that is going to be important.
The big driver for the Indian economy. I just want to go across because we had, when initially just after the budget, we had the markets shooting up.